In this video, I'm identifying 10 top second wines. While second wines are certainly very common in Bordeaux, they're also used in other places around the world as well. So this video is not limited to Bordeaux, and in fact, I'll be discussing second wines from 5 different countries in this video. But first, what is a second wine? Well, a second wine is a wine that's made from fruit that a producer determined was not good enough to be included in the top wine. In many instances, it's produced from younger vines or from fruit that just was declassified because they didn't want to include it in the top wine. So why would anyone want to purchase a second wine? Well, it's not to celebrate mediocrity. And in fact, the quality of these second wines has been improving greatly. Many of these second wines are made by the exact same winemaking team, and you can get a feel for the house style by trying the second wine. Better still, the selection process that producers have been using has become much more stringent than it was in years past. Several decades ago, for example, producers used to use the vast majority of their harvest in the top wine. But now, a majority of producers will use only half and sometimes even as little as a third of their harvest in the top wine. As a result, that selection process has increased the quality of both the producer's top wines and the second wines. Second wines are also much more affordable than the top wine and are typically available for a small fraction of the price of the top wine. In Sassicaya's case, for example, Sassicaia is now selling for close to $300 a bottle, whereas the second wine is only around $60 a bottle. Second wines are also made in a much more approachable style than the top wine, and for that reason, you're often able to enjoy them much earlier than the top wine. So whether you want to use the second wines as a cellar defender, or you just enjoy drinking them in their own right, they can be a valuable part of your collection. For these reasons, second wines have become extremely popular with collectors and are even rallying in terms of investments. The first top second wine is Chateau Margaux's Pavillon Rouge, and it's only fitting that I start with Margaux, as Chateau Margaux was one of the very first producers to come out with a second wine way back in the 1700s. Margaux is also known for using an extremely strict selection for its top wine. In fact, they typically use only about 1/3 of the fruit for their top wine, and then the next third goes into their second wine, and they even have a third wine which uses the bottom third of the fruit. One pro tip for you is when you're looking for a second wine, you want to pick a producer that has a very strict selection for its top wine, since that means that a lot of high quality fruit will be included in that second wine. Likewise, if a producer has a third wine, then the worst of their fruit will not be included in the second wine, which will also help to make the second wine stronger. To be sure, Pavillon Rouge is not a cheap wine. It sells for right around $200 or so, but it offers exceptional quality, and the quality rivals or exceeds that of many of the top wines from other classified growth producers. It's also about a third, sometimes even less, of the price of the Chateau Margaux top wine. Dominus, which is owned by the same family that owns Chateau Petrus in Bordeaux, makes one of my very favorite Napa Valley Cabernets. Unfortunately, the price for that wine now exceeds $300 per bottle. That makes the second wine, which is known as Napanook, an extremely tempting option at right around $90 a bottle. And in fact, this wine oftentimes exceeds the quality of many Napa Valley Cabernets that sell for far more than that. While the precise composition of this Bordeaux blend will vary by vintage, it's often around 85 to 90% Cabernet Sauvignon, but it typically includes some Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot as well. This is a wine that's designed to be enjoyed on release, but is certainly capable of aging in the cellar for 6 to 8 years as well. Pichon Lalande is one of my very favorite Bordeaux producers, and they've been on an absolute tear lately. And in fact, in most recent vintages, the quality of the top wine for Pichon Lalande will routinely rival that of many of the first growths. But Pichon Lalande also has an outstanding second wine that's called Pichon Comtesse Reserve. This is a wine that's a highly regarded wine in its own right. The 2020 vintage is on store shelves now, and that one received a 94-point score from Jeb Dunnick and a 93-point score from Robert Parker. But this wine sells for only around 1/5 or 20% of the cost of the top wine for Pichon Lalande. While historically Pichon Lalande has been known as an elegant wine that was somewhat approachable early on, They've been adding a higher percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon to the top wine in recent vintages, and that wine's becoming a little bit more structured, much like its neighbor, Léoville-Lescasse. This second wine, however, has around 47% Merlot and is much more approachable than the top wine, and so this is definitely one that you can enjoy much younger. It's an absolute steal at around $50 to $55 per bottle, and one I highly recommend. Pingus is one of the most collectible Spanish wines. This is a cult wine from Ribera del Duero that routinely sells for around $800 a bottle and up. Fortunately, however, Pingus has a second wine that's called Flor de Pingus, which you can typically find for much closer to $100 a bottle, and which still offers exceptional quality. Flor de Pingus is produced from very old Tempranillo vines, and it's a collectible wine in its own right. It's also extremely age-worthy. I recently found a 2001 Flor de Pingus on a restaurant wine list, and it was still drinking beautifully. So if you buy this one, I would try to resist the temptation to open it immediately, and I would definitely try to give it some additional bottle aging. And it's also one that you may want to track down in the secondary market if you can find some with good provenance. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. Léoville-Lescasse is relatively new to the second wine scene. Le Petit Lion has only been sold since around the 2007 vintage. Lescasse came out with this second wine for two reasons. First, they completed a replanting program for some of the fruit that used to go into the top wine, and so the younger vines produce fruit that goes into this second wine. In addition, Lescasse also puts a number of plots of Merlot in this second wine. This is so because with the consistently warmer vintages in Bordeaux, Lescasse does not require as much Merlot in its top wine. In the past, it used to include this Merlot in the top wine when the Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, which ripens later than Merlot, was not able to achieve full ripeness, and they needed some Merlot to soften that blend. Due at least in part to the substantial Merlot percentage, Le Petit Lion is a wine that's ready to enjoy much younger than the Lescasse top wine. This is a welcome relief because the Lescasse top wine often takes decades before it reaches peak maturity. In fact, somewhat comically, I'm still waiting to open my 1986 Lescasse. This is a wine that's generally very well received by critics. It sells for around $70 a bottle, and this compares extremely favorably to the price for the top wine, which is closer to $300 a bottle. Located in the Colchagua Valley, Clos Apalta is one of my favorite Chilean producers. Their top wine is always excellent, but they also have an outstanding second wine that sells for around $50 a bottle. This second wine is a Bordeaux blend that typically consists of around 50% Carmenere, 1/3 Merlot, and then it also has some Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot. This wine matures for 8 months in new French oak, and then another 14 months in a blend of 50% new oak and 50% one-year-old oak. This is a full-bodied wine with lush fruit and smooth tannins. It's one you can enjoy on release with a healthy decant and a meal, but it will certainly also age for up to 5 to 7 years with no difficulty at all. One of my favorite producers from Saint-Estèphe on Bordeaux's left bank is Costes-Tournelle. This producer has been firing on all cylinders lately, and their top wine is absolutely outstanding. But they also make an interesting second wine that's certainly very worthy of consideration, and which is a screaming bargain at around $48 or $50 per bottle. And this wine is called Pagodes de Cos. This is a second wine that's typically around 60% Cabernet Sauvignon and 1/3 Merlot, but they also include some Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. Descriptors for this impressive wine include black and blue fruit, lead pencil, tobacco, and cedar. This is a seamless wine with fine-grained tannins and an impressive finish. While you could enjoy this wine on release with a healthy decant, it will also cruise in the cellar for up to a decade. Sassicaia is one of my favorite Super Tuscan wines. When I first started out collecting, I was able to buy a lot of the 2009 and 2010 vintages for around $110 or $120 per bottle. Sadly, however, the price has escalated dramatically and is now selling for around $300 a bottle. So that certainly makes the Guidalberto, the Sassicaia second wine, a very appealing proposition at around $60 to $65 per bottle in the United States. The 2021 vintage of Guidalberto was extremely well received by critics, with Decanter magazine giving it a 95, for example. The Sassicaia winemaker also said that he believes that the 2021 Guidalberto was the very best vintage of that wine to date. This is a wine that's made in a much more approachable style than the Sassicaia top wine. The 2021 vintage was a blend that consists of 60% Cabernet Sauvignon and 40% Merlot. This is a higher percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon than they typically use, but the reason for that is just that the Cabernet Sauvignon was particularly strong in the 2021 vintage. If you're tempted to try this one young, I'd definitely give it a vigorous decant, but it's better with a few years of additional bottle age on it. If you're interested to try Chateau Angelus but you haven't done so yet, you may want to try the second wine first. Chateau Angelus' second wine is called Le Clarence de Haut-Brion. This wine sells for around $150 or so per bottle in the United States. This is a very highly acclaimed wine, and it's one that I definitely let sit for at least 5 years after the vintage before you start digging in. I recently had the 2010 vintage, for example, and it was still showing extremely well, but it's also capable of much more aging as well. While the precise composition of this Bordeaux blend will vary by vintage, the 2019 vintage is representative. That blend consisted of 73% Merlot, 16% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 11% Cabernet Franc. Located in Saint-Emilion, Chateau Angelus has been one of the leading right bank Bordeaux producers since at least 1989. Since 1987, Chateau Angelus has also made a second wine that's called Carillon d'Angelus. This is a wine that's mostly Merlot dominant, but also includes some Cabernet Franc and sometimes even a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. This is a powerful, structured second wine, so you definitely want to give it a few years of additional bottle age before you start enjoying it, and it's a wine that will cruise in the cellar for 15 years with no difficulty at all. This is a wine that sells for around $120 per bottle, maybe a little bit less if you shop around, and of course that's a small fraction of what you will pay for the top wine of Chateau Angelus. If you're a fan of Bordeaux like I am, be sure to check out the playlist, which is in the pinned comment below.